There's a specific kind of silence that means someone is done with you, and there's a completely different kind of silence that means the exact opposite. And today, I want to teach you how to tell them apart, because I think most people never learn this distinction, and it costs them years of confusion. If you've ever gone quiet with someone, or had someone go quiet on you, and spent that silence trying to decode whether it meant the end or just a pause, this video is for you, because I'm going to walk you through the one silent sign that tells you an avoidant partner has not let go of you, even when everything on the surface looks like distance. Let's start with what most people assume silence means, because I think the assumption itself is the problem. When someone with an avoidant attachment style goes quiet, the instinct is to read that silence as absence, as disappearance, as a slow fade toward nothing. And sometimes that's exactly what it is. I won't pretend otherwise. But there's another kind of silence that looks identical from a distance and means something completely different up close. And learning to spot the difference is one of the most useful skills you can develop if you're dealing with someone who pulls away. Here's the sign. It's not something they say. It's something they do without saying anything at all. And it's this. They keep a thread of connection alive, even while pulling back everywhere else. Not a grand gesture, not a declaration, a thread. A small, quiet, easy-to-miss thread that they maintain even in the middle of creating distance. What does that actually look like in practice? Because I don't want to leave this abstract. It looks like someone who stops texting you regularly, stops initiating plans, maybe even stops responding as quickly as they used to, but who still watches your stories every single day. It looks like someone who goes quiet for a week, but still reacts to the one post you made that mattered to you, the one about your grandmother or your promotion or the thing you'd been nervous about for months. It looks like someone who hasn't reached out in 10 days, but who still remembers, weeks later, a detail from a conversation you were sure they weren't paying attention to. It looks like someone who pulls back from the relationship as a whole, but who cannot quite bring themselves to fully disappear from your life. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second, because I think it's the key to this entire video. Cannot quite bring themselves to fully disappear. That's different from someone who's checked out. Someone who's genuinely done, someone whose feelings have actually faded, tends to disappear cleanly. Not always instantly, but over time, the threads thin out one by one until there's nothing left. They stop watching your stories because they've stopped being curious about your life. They stop remembering details because they've stopped storing them. Their attention moves on fully because there's nothing pulling it back towards you anymore. But an avoidant partner who still has real feelings, who has pulled away because closeness scared some part of them, but who hasn't actually let go of you internally, behaves differently. They create distance in the parts of the relationship that feel the most vulnerable, the direct communication, the plans, the vulnerability, the parts that require them to be present and exposed. But they maintain the parts that let them stay connected without having to be exposed. Watching a story doesn't require vulnerability. It's silent, it's low risk. It lets them keep tabs on you, stay close to your life, without having to face whatever discomfort made them pull away from direct contact in the first place. That's why I call it a silent sign. It's not something they're choosing to show you on purpose. It's something that leaks out despite their pulling away, because the part of them that doesn't want to lose you hasn't actually gone anywhere. I worked with a woman, I'll call Elena, who went through this with someone she'd been seeing for about 5 months. He pulled back hard after things got emotionally intense one weekend, the kind of weekend where you say things you don't usually say, and it scares one of you afterward. For almost 3 weeks, he barely texted, plans stopped. The relationship, on paper, looked like it was quietly dying. Elena was devastated and convinced it was over. And honestly, given how most advice out there frames avoidant withdrawal, I understand why she thought that. But here's what she noticed, almost by accident, because she wasn't looking for it. He was still listening to a playlist she'd made him, and she could tell because of how a shared music app worked. Small detail, but she noticed. He liked a single photo she posted, just one, out of several she'd posted that week. And it happened to be the one of her with her niece, the one that meant the most to her personally. Not the most flattering one, the most meaningful one. He hadn't said a word to her in 9 days, but he'd found and engaged with the one post out of 5 that actually mattered. I'm not telling you that story because I want you to become a detective, obsessively parsing likes and views for meaning, because that path leads to a kind of anxious hypervigilance that isn't good for you, and honestly isn't accurate most of the time either. I'm telling you that story because it illustrates the pattern precisely. Someone who has truly let go doesn't selectively engage with the most meaningful thing you shared. They don't have the emotional radar left to know which post mattered most because they've stopped paying that kind of attention. Selective, quiet engagement, especially with the things that carry real weight, rather than the easy surface level stuff, is a sign that someone is still emotionally tracking you, even while they're distant. It's not proof of a healthy relationship. It's not proof they're going to come around on any particular timeline, but it is proof that the door in their mind hasn't fully closed. I want to explain the psychology underneath this because I think it makes the sign make a lot more sense once you understand why avoidant partners behave this way instead of just cutting contact cleanly if they're genuinely still invested. Avoidant attachment is often rooted in a nervous system that learned early on that closeness comes with a cost. Maybe that cost was feeling smothered. Maybe it was feeling like your own needs were too much for someone else to hold. Maybe it was watching closeness turn into conflict or disappointment repeatedly until distance started to feel safer than intimacy. Whatever the origin, the result is a pattern where getting close to someone triggers a kind of internal alarm, and pulling away is the nervous system's way of turning that alarm off. But here's the important part. The alarm is about closeness, specifically about the vulnerability of direct, present, engaged connection. It is not necessarily about you, and it is not necessarily about their actual feelings toward you. This is why an avoidant person can pull away hard from direct contact while still, quietly, unconsciously maintaining low-risk connection through the side door. Watching your stories doesn't set off the alarm the way answering your text about how they're feeling does. Remembering details about your life doesn't require them to be emotionally present with you in the way a real conversation does. So the nervous system allows those things to continue even while shutting down the higher risk forms of closeness. This is also why the silent sign is often more honest than the loud signs. When an avoidant person is still in contact with you, texting you, seeing you, there's a performance element sometimes, especially if part of them feels guilty about withdrawing and is trying to manage your feelings about it. But the quiet stuff, the stuff they're not doing to prove anything to you because they don't even think you're paying attention to it, that's harder to fake because there's no audience for it. Nobody maintains a private playlist as a manipulation tactic. Nobody selectively engages with your most meaningful post as some kind of strategy. Those behaviors happen because something in them is still tracking you, still caring, even while the rest of the relationship goes quiet. Now, I want to be really careful here because I don't want this video to become an excuse for you to stay in something that isn't actually serving you just because you found one small thread of quiet connection. A thread is not a relationship. A thread is information, and information should inform your decisions, not replace them. If someone is maintaining a silent thread, but never actually turning that thread back into real, present, consistent connection, at some point the thread stops mattering, no matter how meaningful it feels to notice it. So let's talk about what this sign is actually useful for, because I think that's the part people skip past. This sign is useful for one specific thing. It tells you whether the withdrawal you're experiencing is coming from someone who's actually let go internally, or someone who's scared and pulling away from closeness while still emotionally attached. That's valuable information because it changes how you might choose to respond. And more importantly, it changes what you should expect if you decide to give things time. If someone has actually let go, no amount of patience or understanding is going to bring the thread back because there's no thread there to bring back. In that case, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop looking for signs of life in something that's already over, because doing that will keep you in a kind of limbo that's genuinely painful and doesn't lead anywhere. If someone is showing you this silent sign, the honest, careful thing to say is that it means there's still something there worth paying attention to, not that it guarantees anything about the future. It doesn't mean they'll come back. It doesn't mean the relationship will work out. It doesn't mean their pulling away wasn't painful or that you have to just wait around indefinitely while they sort themselves out. What it means is that this particular person, in this particular moment, has not emotionally closed the door on you, even though they've closed a lot of other doors. And how you respond to that information is genuinely up to you. Some of you will decide that's enough to hold on a little longer, especially if there's a broader pattern of this person eventually returning with real effort, which I've talked about elsewhere. Others of you will decide that a silent thread isn't enough, that you need someone who can offer real, present connection, not just quiet tracking from a distance, and that's a completely valid place to land too. I'm not here to tell you which choice is right for your life. I'm here to make sure you're making that choice with accurate information instead of guessing. I also want to address something that I think trips people up constantly in this specific area, which is the difference between a silent thread that reflects genuine unresolved feeling and behavior that just looks similar but comes from a much less flattering place. Some people maintain low-effort contact, watching stories, occasional likes, not because they still care in any meaningful way, but simply out of habit or curiosity or a kind of low-stakes ego check, wanting to know they're still thought of, without wanting to actually invest anything. This is real, and I don't want to pretend it isn't, because I think giving you only the hopeful interpretation would be doing you a disservice. The way you tell the difference is by looking at what happens if the silent thread ever gets tested. Does the quiet engagement ever, even occasionally, turn into an actual reach out, a message, a moment of real contact, even a small one? Or does it stay permanently at that low, safe, no-risk level indefinitely, month after month, with nothing more ever offered? A genuine, unresolved thread tends to occasionally surface into something more, even briefly, even imperfectly. A habitual, low-investment thread tends to stay exactly where it is forever, because there was never anything underneath it pushing to become more. I think it's also worth saying, because I don't think enough people say this clearly, that you are allowed to feel two things at once here. You're allowed to find some comfort in recognizing that someone hasn't fully let go of you, and also feel frustrated, even angry, that a silent thread is all you're getting instead of the real, present relationship you actually want and deserve. Those two feelings aren't contradictory. They're both honest responses to a situation that is, by its nature, incomplete. An avoidant partner who maintains a silent thread while withdrawing from real closeness is giving you something, but it's not enough on its own, and you're allowed to want more than a thread. You're allowed to want the whole rope. I want to give you something practical to actually do with this information, because I don't think it's fair to explain a pattern without also giving you a way to use it responsibly. If you notice this silent sign in someone who's pulled away from you, resist the urge to immediately read it as a green light to chase harder. That's the mistake I see people make most often. They notice the thread and they think they still care. So if I just push a little more, reach out a little more, show them how much I care, they'll come back faster. In my experience, that tends to backfire with avoidant partners specifically, because pressure is exactly the thing that triggers the withdrawal in the first place. The thread exists because it's low pressure. The moment you turn it into pressure, you risk breaking the very thing that was quietly keeping them connected to you. Instead, let the thread exist without trying to control it. Continue living your life in a way that isn't organized around waiting for them. If they're going to close the gap on their own, and this connects to something I've talked about before, they need room to actually do that without feeling like every silence is going to be met with a flood of messages the second they show the smallest sign of life. Give yourself permission to notice the thread without needing it to mean more than it currently does. Let it be information, not a promise. I also want to speak directly to something I think a lot of you are quietly feeling as you watch this, which is a kind of exhaustion with having to become an expert interpreter of someone else's silence just to feel secure in a relationship. I hear you. I want to be honest that this isn't how a relationship is supposed to feel long-term. Understanding these patterns is useful, especially early on or during a difficult period, or while you're deciding whether someone is worth continuing to invest in. But it isn't a substitute for an actual relationship where you don't have to decode stories and likes to know where you stand. If you find yourself doing this kind of quiet detective work for months or years on end, with no shift toward more direct, consistent connection, that in itself is information too, and it's worth being honest with yourself about what that's telling you about the relationship as a whole. I'll leave you with this. Silence isn't one thing. It's not always the end, and it's not always secretly full of hidden meaning either. Sometimes it's just silence, empty of anything underneath it. But when you learn to notice the difference between someone who's gone quiet because they've let go and someone who's gone quiet because closeness scared them while some part of them is still quietly holding on, you stop being at the mercy of your own anxious guessing. You start being able to read what's actually in front of you, clearly, honestly, without the fantasy and without the doom. That clarity won't make the waiting easy, but it will make it a lot less confusing. And confusion, more than almost anything else, is what wears people down in situations like this. If this resonated with where you are right now, stay with me, because next I want to walk you through what to actually do once you've spotted this sign, and how to tell, over time, whether that thread is ever going to turn into something real.